Ah, pensei que era a versão do Roberto do teste do velho. E oh yeah, that was what I thought. But then I ended up and then I had like said it was not like never seen that like and then it started with this yes awesome. So I think they wanted to do that even our organization check. I know big ones. I'll sign it, but you need yeah, I think it's just a different thing. Wow. Oh, okay. So,
Pessoal, faz ele da mesa que eu falei, ele quer saber como é que ele acessa pelo computador ou os outros estavam acessando o negócio da aula aqui ontem. Eu falei que é passar, eu falei que era tirar foto do QR Code, só que ele não sabe como é que ele faz isso com o notebook dele. Aí eu não sei se dá para pegar, entrar pelo QR Code aqui, não dá pelo.
Não, o que ele quer exatamente?
Ele quer. Ele rapaz, não um de azul, o outro sentado ali.
Claro.
Lá.
Claro.
Eu não vi o nome dele. Mas ele está na mesa com o notebook prata, já com colete azul. Bom ouvir vocês, João.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. All right, raise your hand if you're tired. Okay. Well, we're on our last day, so thank you for all being so enthusiastic and engaging. We've been just overwhelmed by the response for the whole workshop, and it's sad that it's coming to an end, but you know, all good things do, I guess. So I'm going to do the first two modules today. The first one's going to be talking about institutional and classroom strategies for how to handle some, I'll close the door. For how to handle maybe some different policies that you might want to talk about with other people at your university. and then also some policies for your class. And then the second module, module 10, is going to talk a little bit about the future. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Maybe. All right, it's trying. Okay, so some learning objectives. We're going to look at the current landscape of some different Gen AI policies. We're going to talk about a little framework that we put together that addresses some common challenges in these different policies. We're going to look at some specific ideas that you can implement in your course. We're going to talk about refactoring some engineering assignments based on other things that we've done already. And yeah, let's just get into it. So rather than do the whole app thing, let's just do a show of hands. What's your biggest institutional barrier to AI integration? So raise your hand if it's technology infrastructure. So we don't know how to actually manage these tools. We don't have the technology to do it. Okay, a few. Faculty readiness. Yeah, a lot more. Policy development. You don't have a concrete policy? Yeah, a few. Student preparation. Students don't know how to handle these tools. Okay, yeah. Funding, resources, unsure if, yeah, okay. Yeah, so a lot of different concerns. And this is stuff that we've been seeing. Yeah, this is stuff that we're seeing too in research. So this is a few different papers, but in broad strokes, less than 10% of institutions globally have a formal AI policy today. That's not a lot. And talking with many of you, I think that we can see a similar trend here. 31% of students have restrictions about their use, but that's not a lot, right? And when we're talking about the concerns that many people have been voicing this workshop, if we don't have a lot of policies, students are going to do what they want to do. Also, faculty concerns. Across research, as everyone just had with their hands up, it's extremely clear that faculty don't feel they have enough direction. They feel that their universities might give them some guidelines, but not enough. They don't know how to implement it, and I think that's why we're all here. So I just wanted to put up some of these statistics, some of these findings to show you that you're not alone. This is a problem that many faculty are facing across many different countries. Faculty believe they have little to no knowledge of AI. The faculty don't know, faculty recognize the need to engage with students. This is a survey of higher education institutions. 48% disagreed or strongly disagreed that their institution has sufficient policies. So there's a gap that we need to fill. Additionally, the accelerated rate of the adoption, as we all know, has been putting a lot of pressure not only on instructors, but on administrators, on centers for teaching and learning, to figure out how to handle all this stuff. And there's also a consideration for professional engineering practice. How should we mesh with these different stakeholders? Ultimately, what these two slides are trying to convey is that there is quite a range of responses to AI in terms of institutional policies, but then also a range of considerations for who should be involved in making these policies, right? Is it up to the instructors? Is it up to administrators? Should it be coalitions of teachers? Should we be relying on industry? There's a lot of questions right now about who really should be taking charge. And actually, in some of the findings from Andrew's career grant, and we're talking with a lot of instructors, a theme that keeps coming up is that AI, and I said this to some other people yesterday, is always someone else's problem. It's not mine. It's them, or maybe they'll fix it, or they'll address it, and I'll be able to benefit from their help. But if everyone has this belief that it's someone else going to be doing it, then nothing happens, right? So that's a problem that we need to figure out. Additionally, the last point, student equity concerns, that's been a theme throughout the presentation so far, need to be explicitly addressed. We can't just create policies with knowledge that there are equity barriers, but then not address them. So that's a central element too. So I want show of hands. What is your institution's readiness on a scale of 1 to 5? Raise your hand if it's a 5. 4. 3. A little 3. 2. More 2s. Okay. 1. We're terrible. Okay. Okay. So a bit of a range. Okay. So what makes a good institutional policy? And this I took from really what makes a good engineer. And what makes a good engineer, at least in my experience as an engineer, is knowing how to ask the right questions. And I was always amazed when I was working at meetings with executives who would come in and ask a question about the one thing I hope they didn't ask a question about. They know how to ask the right questions. And asking the right questions means getting you information that you need. That's bottom line what it's about. So when we look at these different levels, right, we have an instructional level, right, all of you. We have departmental levels, institutional levels, right? And then you might even add a fourth, which is stakeholders, industry perspectives. Does each level answer the questions from the other levels? That's going to be the base, that's going to be the benchmark for institutional policies. And when you're thinking about your class or the way that your university is handling things, I would ask you to consider, are all of my questions being answered? Is the information that I am trying to get available, right? Because if you are trying to find something out and there's no answer, it creates confusion. Confusion creates vulnerability. It creates an opportunity for you to kind of do what feels good or what feels like it should be the right answer, but that might not be an answer that's consistent across students' courses. It might not be what is effective in the long run for students learning. So we need to have alignment between all of these different stakeholders. And that's a key point, that you can't do any type of policy without engagement from all of these different people working together. So let's see if this works maybe. No? Okay. So we came up with this transform framework. And the idea here is not really the acronym, but more that these are types of questions that we're seeing both from research and then from also talking with all of you, questions that people have about that need to be addressed in different institutional policies in some way or another. So technology infrastructure, robust, scalable, equitable technology foundation that can support comprehensive AI integration across the institution. So from a sheer technology standpoint, do we have the tech? How do we access the tech? How do students access the tech? How do we know that different students from different backgrounds can access it? So this point is really just about the tech itself. Funding, secure, sustainable, diversified funding that supports long-term AI investment. It's great if we can get some technologies here and now, but what happens 10 years from now, right? These models and these systems keep improving year after year after year, and it seems like something new is popping up all the time. So how do we ensure that our institutions in the long run have what it takes to keep our AI momentum and also help support students as these new tools keep coming in and they're using these tools, right? So thinking about the future and return on investment as well. Assessment and evaluation. So again, multi-level evaluation framework. If you have an institutional stakeholders, if you have teachers, if you have departments, how are all of them being assessed, evaluated? And that's a common question that we see coming up in interviews, is that faculty don't know how they should be both assessing their own students, but then how they should be assessed in terms of their progress using AI. And when it comes to things like, at least in the United States, promotion and tenure, if the university is trying to make AI more common and more used at the university, how faculty, how departments are being evaluated toward those goals is a very important thing and needs to be explicit in these different types of policies. Norms and culture, this is something that goes without saying, but actually should be said more, is that we all have different feelings about AI. Some might be more skeptical than others. Some might just feel they have to use it and they don't have a choice. Others are extremely enthusiastic. Those differences create challenges when it comes to your department or your institutional culture. And we've certainly had a fair share of faculty butting heads over difference in beliefs. So when it comes to leaders of these different institutions, leaders of departments, and even in your own classroom, what's the culture that you're trying to create? And how are you being explicit in those types of values and assumptions that you're making? And then how do those values and assumptions come out into the products that you give to students, come out into those policies, right? Because culture is not just about values that we have, but it's also about how those values are manifest into our world, right? The next one, support systems. So creating accessible, comprehensive support infrastructure. So people who are trying to learn more about AI. I know many of you are going back to your institutions to talk more with others about the stuff that you learned here. So this is a key point. How are people going to start learning more about AI at your schools? How are you going to continue a learning pathway for them? Faculty development as well. Related to that, how are you going to build faculty capacity for these tools? Maybe enthusiasm, if that's your goal as well. Criticality toward them. Right? We're talking about all this bias, equity concerns. How are you ensuring that faculty are not only learning about these tools, but also learning how to use them in a critical way, right? Outcomes and impacts. What ultimately are you trying to do? If we have a goal of AI integration, what does that integration look like? Are there metrics for that? How are we going to evaluate them? At what time are we going to be evaluating them, right? These are concerns that many faculty have when they come and talk with us, because you might have an institutional goal of, hey, we want AI, but what does that actually look like? What's the target that we're all working toward? Responsibility and ethics. Obviously, that's been a big theme for this whole workshop. How are we talking about what is ethical for our universities, for our students, and how are we making sure that that responsible use is happening across all these different levels? And the last one related to all of it, metrics and monitoring. How are we seeing the progress as it's unfolding? How are we measuring the impact of these technologies? There's an MIT study that came out recently that said 95% of businesses in the United States had zero return on AI. That's a type of metric, right? You're looking at just the bottom line return on investment, but maybe that's not the best metric for your school, your institution, your classroom, but you still need something to evaluate how is this all going, right? Okay. So quick show of hands. I guess we can keep going. We're a little short on time. Okay, so I wanted to pull up one study in particular just to show you a little bit about the differences in policies between institutions globally. So this paper by Zhao et al. From earlier this year looked at 80 different policies across the globe and compared the different aspects that were considered in them and found some different themes. The first one, disclosure. Only 14 policies across all these 80 across the globe, only 14 mention disclosure, so disclosing your use of AI, versus 177 mention privacy. Similarly, skepticism. I think many of you are a little skeptical. Only 2 policies mentioned how to handle skepticism. Similarly, alternative methods. So as an example, the EU AI Act has in there a clause that says people can opt out of AI use. You as a student can say, I don't want to participate in AI. I don't want my data to be used for AI. If that's okay at your institution, or if that's something that's in law, what does that alternative method look like? Are those students in a different classroom? How do we ensure that that classroom has effective learning happening? And also, when it comes to these different technologies, are we being explicit about the specific ones that we want people to use, or are we just saying AI very broadly? And as we saw earlier, AI doesn't mean any one thing, right? So it's ambiguous. Democratization, how many people can use these tools? One mention of democratization, of making these tools accessible for a wide range of people. So here, they have a quote: "There's less focus on guidelines for teachers in educational management, and discipline-based guidelines appear the least." So there is a wide range of, there's a wide variety of different policies, and many leave out similar aspects in them. Yeah.
Which this is those exposures, skepticism, and alternative methods, for instance, were they the same ones or completely different ones?
That's a good question. They didn't publish in the paper all of the specifics for the different policies, but they're not the same. They're not the same. Yeah, these different themes they're broad themes. It's not like a verbatim word for word type of thing. So even within alternative methods, even within disclosure, what does disclosure look like will vary between institutions, vary between countries. I know, at least in the United States, we don't feel the need to disclose many things about data use to students or even to the broader public. So I think cultural values too get embedded into these different policies. So yeah, so what's the so what is these are vulnerabilities. These differences are vulnerabilities in the sense that your students, your instructors, your departments, even if they don't want to, can exploit policy gaps that aren't talked about, right? Things that aren't included. And if we want critical thinkers, don't you think it's important that like we start talking more about skepticism and we start talking more about alternative methods, right? Like these things are important for us to explicitly say in these policies. So this paper here talks about how we get toward a institutional policy that does many of these, that addresses many of these concerns. So they have 3 different aspects: pedagogy, so assessment design, competency development; governance, the institutional oversight and compliance; and operations, so the tool use. But even though this framework looks nice, I want to just highlight how it gets a little complicated once you start getting specific, right? So like, for those who use computer-aided design, CAD, does that fit with pedagogy? Does that fit with operations? How about code generation? Is that a capability again, or is that now an addition to pedagogy? Do we want to have a tutoring system, right? How about design processes requiring documentation? Is that something that we need tools for, or is that also related to pedagogy? You can see that accreditation systems, right? Is that pedagogy? Is that governance? Who's to say where and who should be in charge of that sort of stuff? Professional ethics alignment, right? Industry collaboration, maybe? I don't know what this is. Success metrics. So as you can see, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. And this framework is helpful, right? As is the transform framework, because transform framework tells us some questions that people might frequently have. This tells us at least what would make for a good policy. But even within this, very quickly we see there's overlap between the concerns, between concerns of all of them, between where something should fit, where it should be addressed. So that's a challenge for all of us as we make these policies. And going off that, one common theme that at least we say a lot to instructors, to admin, is this idea that Gen AI is a course enhancer. Enhancing, not necessarily in a good way. It enhances the good stuff and it enhances the bad stuff. And I think that's something we're all dealing with, is we quickly see, hey, these tools are great for like personalization, right? They're great for getting some feedback. But at the same time, if my assessments are easy to be completed with Gen AI, then it's going to make my class that much harder to measure learning. So rather than think of Gen AI as necessarily one good thing, one bad thing, I like to say it's enhancing the good and the bad at the same time, right? So what are the good and bad, good and maybe improvable aspects of your policy? So going into at least your specific class, thinking about this at the course level. In the United States, we give syllabi, at the beginning of courses, and that tells us, learning objectives, the grading, right? The different tests that we're going to have. Now, many instructors are also including an AI policy. Unfortunately, many of those AI policy statements are copied from what the university provides and aren't expanded on. So instructors just assume that that's sufficient. But as we've seen, there's overlap in all these different ideas, and that overlap means that just copying the institutional policy isn't specific enough for your one class. So number one, be explicit in identifying expectations and appropriate use for each course and assignment. On the top, I don't know if this has a laser or something, but I don't know. Up at the top, these icons were developed by Cornell. If you Google Cornell AI icons, you'll be able to find it very easily. But they introduced these icons for all of the instructors to use for every assignment across all their courses. And rather than say just, hey, you can use AI or you can't use AI, there's actually a spectrum. So there's any AI, you can use any tool. There's approved tools. There's also like exploring. So you want to use AI as an opportunity to explore a landscape or explore different tools, or AI free. But the key idea here is students can quickly see these icons and understand what is expected of them. And it's explicit. It's all across the whole campus. They have policies like that. So maybe that's a strategy you would like to implement as well. The second, provide well-defined learning outcomes that incorporate these Gen AI policies and also justify why, right? It's not enough to just give students in your class an icon like this and say, oh, you can use AI or you can't use AI. Students want to know why. They want to know why they're learning what they're learning, or why you're asking them to do what they're doing, whether it's helpful for their careers, whether it's helpful just because it's interesting. Whether you want to be clear in all of these, you want to be clear in the types of expectations you have. And an example here is, we talk a lot about using AI to cheat. What if you provide students with like an ethical slippery slope? You give them a document that says, this prompt's good, this one's a little questionable, this one's really questionable, and this one would be against our honor code. This type of use would be against our honor code, because students are having to make these assumptions. It's not necessarily that they are nefarious or that they have ill intent, but that they just don't know. They don't know what the expectation is. So if we give them a reason, and then we also are clear about the types of appropriate use, that helps students. The third, specify how and what to document when it comes to AI use, right? It's not just a matter of tell me you used AI. Tell me exactly what you were using it for, why you were using it, step by step by step. Some actual publishing companies for researchers have asked researchers to write every single interaction that they have with an AI and submit that along with their manuscript for the journal. And that might be a little extreme for some, but for students, if you want to have that type of monitoring, you have to be explicit about it. And you need to tell them exactly what to say in those things. Maybe give them examples of it too. Also, 4, actively engage with students. This isn't something that we can be passive about. It's not something you put in a syllabus and then that's it. AI is done, right? It was like what Andrew was saying earlier about how many people think we should be teaching ethics versus how many people teach ethics. We all might say that it's important to integrate AI into our classrooms. It's important to be transparent, but we have to keep doing that all through the semester. And that's going to take a lot of effort for us, but it's going to be worthwhile in helping students understand appropriate use and what aspects of AI are helpful and not helpful for their learning. The 5th, integrate Gen AI critiques. And this is something, at least that really comes out of my research, is that sometimes we assume as instructors, as educators, that students see these tools and immediately want to use them to cheat. They want to go and party with their friends, right? They just want to hang out and be done with classes. The reality isn't that stark. Many students feel that they are concerned of their futures. Many say that they are worried they're using AI too much. They're worried about what happens if AI costs go up. They're worried about getting a job if someone that they're competing against can prompt engineer better than them. There's skepticism among students. It's not a monolith. It's not just one viewpoint. So actively engage with students about these different critical perspectives. There's a lot of people publishing research and writing books right now about how we should be wary of the companies and of these tools. And it's important to show students that we're having those same concerns, right? And the last one, be wary of Gen AI detection tools at a class level, especially for automated grading systems. This is an active area of research and development. It's something that we're doing a lot, but right now, their tools aren't good enough yet. And also, if you're starting to use these tools for students and you're not telling students you're using them, it could create a negative relationship down the road if a student realizes that the teacher doesn't care enough to give them feedback themselves. So again, Gen AI is a course enhancer. These are things we can do to enhance the good parts of AI integration, but it's equally important to consider how Gen AI can be enhancing the bad or not so great parts of our courses. So I have a few examples here of a specific assignment. And remember earlier I had those different icons up about different AI use. So what does that actually look like? Okay, so here I'm electrical engineering. So design an amplifier circuit with some gain requirements. Okay, like just a generic assignment, right? And if I were a student, I could just put it into AI and boom, go and have fun, right? If we were to change this up a little, like prohibit, so no AI. Design an op-amp circuit with a gain of 50 using hand calculations, no simulation software or Gen AI tools, because this builds your fundamental circuit and analysis skills. And that's something, if you go and get a job, they're going to test you on. At least me, when I was applying to jobs, I had to sit down and they gave me circuits to solve in front of them. I couldn't use an AI for that. So that's an example of prohibit. And again, clear justification. Allow without attribution. Design an amplifier circuit using any resources, including Gen AI tools. Your submission must include, we're being explicit, 1, Gen AI conversation logs, if used, and 2, your verification of what the AI said as an output, and 3, your analysis of why the Gen AI chose what it did or made the moves that it did. So here it's not only that you're using AI, but you're trying to be critical about it too, right? And another one, encourage. So partner with ChatGPT to design an audio amplifier system. So you can see it's now a bigger scope, right? It's more than just the op-amp. Focus your report. It's now a whole report versus just some calculations on system level design, on how you used AI to consider constraints, and also your testing plan for this whole system. So it's not just that we're taking the assignment and then we're adding some little features. We're really thinking about AI as being something, again, that can enhance the whole process of making a more robust system, right? And maybe you start with something like prohibit and work toward encourage, and you use a variety of these in your class. Let's look at one more example. This is from computer science. So design a sorting algorithm from scratch, okay? Very common in different courses. So prohibit. Implement quicksort in Python without any external help, including Gen AI tools. And why? Because understanding algorithm mechanics is crucial for interview success and debugging skills. You need to know how to implement this stuff. You need to know why quicksort is such a good sorting algorithm and what's happening under the hood. A different one, allow with attribution. Implement a sorting algorithm with any assistance, including, now here, class-approved AI tools, not all AI tools. Your code with comments explaining where Gen AI helped you. Analysis of the code's efficiency, because I don't know how many of you use Gen AI to code. It's not always the most efficient. And also your own test cases. I want you to write tests for the code that Gen AI outputs. And the last, encourage, work with GitHub Copilot, so a specific tool, to build a complete data processing pipeline, right? Then that pipeline is going to include a sorting algorithm, but much more than that. And it's going to have a report again. It's going to ask how you got requirements, how you reviewed the code, and also some challenges that you ran into. So you can see with these two examples, there's a gradation in the sophistication that we're asking, in addition to the different requirements that we're looking for when it comes to AI use. Any questions there? Cool. Does it make sense, kind of, this line of, yeah? And so this kind of, how can we extend these ideas to more assignments? I know I didn't give everyone's discipline. Process-oriented assessments, right? We're focused on the doing as what is important, not the outcome, right? The outcome is just a point in time, right? Instead, if we focus on documentation, if we focus on choices, decision-making processes, judgment, that's stuff we want to be emphasizing more and more. Second, validation requirements. If GenAI is allowed, how are we verifying its outputs? And that's a critical skill now that I think all of us are talking about is, hey, I know enough to know when AI is crap. Excuse me, right? I know when it's not good. But our students don't know that stuff. So verification is critical here as we're integrating these tools. Third, Andrew talked about it earlier, metacognitive reflection, right? Of course, maybe students can use AI for this part, and that's something we're gonna have to figure out with these different tools, but asking them explicitly to think about why they were using tools, when they were using these tools, what they were getting out of using these tools. The fourth, real-world constraints. This is something that helps students understand the usefulness of different assignments, right? If something is just a esoteric assignment that doesn't feel grounded in anything, a student might not feel that they care about it. Versus, hey, here's like a medical device that actually, the real medical device, and here's the technology in that medical device, and let's work with GenAI to like break it down and learn more about it, right? And that's something real for students. And many students come into engineering because they want to work on real things, and then we take all the real stuff out. So let's keep making sure that we're adding these real world elements into our course design. And the last one, collaborative problem solving, both with other students, but then also when students use AI as like a junior developer, a junior engineer, helping them be critical of these tools and treating them as an assistant that they are trying to supervise. Plus, it also helps their leadership development too. So these are some general modification strategies that I'd encourage you to think about for your different classes. And there's a citation up there as well for reference. So let's take a few minutes here, and we're going to do a policy creation thing, where we're going to draft a 4-sentence, so very short policy for your institution, and it's going to have these 4 elements. So GenAI tools are allowed, prohibited, whatever, for something. Rationale, why, right? Why are we doing this? The last, implementation, so what are students having to do? And then success. How do you know if this policy is going to be successful? So try to think about something specific, and we're just going to spend like 5-ish minutes. We don't have all that much time because we had to shorten. But let's just think about these different elements in a specific AI policy. All right? If you want to work in your groups, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, we don't have a ton of time this morning, but good ideas for the policy. Anyone want to share real quick? An idea? Okay, we'll keep going. So we've talked a little bit so far about maybe what you can do in your classroom, but faculty development is another critical aspect to the picture, right? Again, it's another element of the model. So what is currently happening when it comes to faculty perspectives? This paper from 2024 asked many different instructors in the United States about their views on Gen AI and clustered them into 4 large groups. The first, optimistic, about a third of people. They agree with the benefits of AI tools and don't really see that many challenges in its integration. There's also people who are critical, about a third as well, are critical of AI tools and somewhat disagree with the benefits, tend to emphasize a few challenges. Those who are critically reflected, another third, agree with the benefits, but more emphasize the challenges. And then a small portion who are neutral, who say, you know, it's good and bad, but whatever, you know, we'll figure it out. So the point here is that we can't treat one another as just being like us. We have to acknowledge that if we're going to do a faculty development workshop, or if we're going to create a community of practice with other instructors, that you're going to probably have instructors who agree to different degrees about the benefits and the challenges. And we need to be addressing those different perspectives instead of treating everyone like we're coming in on the same page. And that's something from Andrew's career grant that we're finding all the time. Is that you have some instructors come in and they say, well, you know, my class is fine. You know, AI can't do any of it, right? Then you have others who say, oh God, I don't know what to do, you know, and everything in between. So it's important for us to try to be receptive in any faculty workshop about handling these different viewpoints, right? So what is not effective? What is not effective is treating all faculty like they're the same, and also asking faculty to rely purely on their expertise and their expertise alone. And that's something that we keep finding over and over, is faculty having to make decisions for themselves based on their knowledge of AI, which, as we all know, it depends on how much you use it, how much you're reading the news, how much you're using all these new tools. It's very hard for all of you to probably have the time to keep up with things. So the more that we put the responsibility on each faculty member to figure out what's good for them, creates variability, it creates vulnerability. And we also want to make sure that faculty all know similar things and have similar resources. So what is effective? Community of practice models. And show of hands, anyone have heard of community of practice? A few? Yeah, so community of practice is an idea that really came out in the late 80s and 90s. And it's a model for not just faculty, but more broadly, engaging people together toward reaching consensus and working together toward learning and toward similar objectives. And community of practices are important because they help align all these different stakeholders, these different perspectives, and bring them together into a single place where they can talk. It also gives them the opportunity to share resources with one another, right? Hey, look at this tool I found, right? Or hey, look at this assignment, everyone was using AI. Or here's one that students really liked, right? Sharing these resources with one another is a terrific way to build both community, but also confidence in our ability to handle AI. Right now, everyone is doing their own thing. That's problematic. Let's come together. Let's collaborate with one another. And that's what's going to make whatever we do successful. So what are some examples of this, right? Like peer assignment check, like I just said, we all look at each other's assignments, right? It might feel a little nervous, like we might not want to do it at first, but you might want to know if other instructors think that you can improve your assessment, right? And sometimes we don't even get instruction on what good assessment looks like. So if you have teaching and learning centers, but then also other instructors from your department or institution looking, that's good feedback for you. And the other, like syllabi repositories, upload your syllabus to your university, share it with one another, right? Like, what do you have to lose? Nothing. You have a lot to gain. You can talk about the different things, the different strategies you're trying, what's working, what's not working. It's important to share this stuff so that we're not duplicating the same work over and over. And this point at the bottom is critical. What is common sense to you is not common sense to other people. So if something just seems intuitive, if something just works in your class, right? That's something you can be sharing with others. And it's important that we do share that stuff. So this question is about what would motivate you to participate in a community of practice. We don't have that much time, but I'd encourage you to think for yourself, why would you want to participate? What's the incentive here? Is it just more work for me to do, or am I actually benefiting from these communities? And the organizers of these communities of practice, if you're at your institution, you're trying to make this type of thing, it's important for you to make a value proposition to show people that you're going to actually benefit from participating, and to keep making sure that people are benefiting from participation. So what's some stuff that we've heard before? Financial stipends. Not everyone can do this, but if people were paid for the time that they spent, maybe even leaders in particular of these communities of practice, if you could help supplement their time even. Recognition, promotion considerations. Everyone loves an award. Everyone loves a little plaque or a little medal, right? We all love that stuff, a little, piece of paper. Sorry, I don't mean to minimize that. Sorry. But it's important for us to say, hey, you did a whole AI development workshop, right? And you did it, you participated, you went through the whole thing, you learned all this stuff, and look, here's a certification for you, right? Or you learned how to be an effective assistant for other instructors, right? Helping people recognize that, something they could talk with other people about, it's not insignificant. Peer collaboration, we talked about graduate student assistance. If you work with undergrads or graduate students, have them help you. You're limited on your time. Have them figure out some of this stuff. And as a graduate student, some of those lessons about how to structure a class, how to engage with students, right? How to make my own syllabus, my own assessments, that's really valuable for me to learn because I want to teach a class too. So if you can incorporate them and make it, hey, you're learning this stuff for your future, right? Then they're benefiting too, right? It's all about what's the value. Conference presentations, the work that we do with AI, especially when it comes to classroom integration, that stuff you could publish. We could also organize conferences. Maybe there's a conference for the different universities in Brazil where everyone comes together and presents once a year the stuff that they're trying, right? This is a great way to help organize or think about organizing these different communities. And the last, put everything online. It doesn't help anyone if it's just on your computer. Share, and also allow it to be accessed later. The challenge is that no one technically wants to do any of it, right? It's all a lot of work, but it's extremely important for our success to integrate these things into our current practices and to constantly be engaging one another. So we're going to close off here with addressing student equity concerns. So these are just a few bubbles, again, building off the different institutional, departmental, classroom level strategies, right? Governance, pedagogy, assessment. When it comes to student equity, this is not something that is any one person's concern and their concern alone. Equity has to be addressed at multiple levels, right? From an infrastructure standpoint, students who come from backgrounds who don't have access to these tools, we need to be thinking about how to provide access to these tools. Campus network limitations, device availability, these are things that are front of mind when it comes to equity. Economic barriers, right? These services cost money. Is there a way that your institution can provide access to these tools so that students who come from different backgrounds still have access? Digital literacy, people come in with different understandings of both technology, but then also of how AI works. Is there a way that we can be addressing common knowledge, fundamental knowledge about AI in our classrooms, at our departments, at our institutions? And also cultural linguistic considerations, right? A lot of these models are trained in English, trained on American data or on data that's really created in large part by Western countries. And that creates limitations in what they know. It creates limitations to people who can't speak English, right? It also creates limitations in their ability to translate between cultural norms, cultural expectations. So are there ways that we can consider looking at regional variations in these edge cases, we say, like cases on the where the models are likely to fail with students from these different backgrounds? Maybe someone who doesn't understand, who has low digital literacy, who comes from a background where they don't have access to these tools, right? When it comes to, and then linguistically, maybe doesn't speak a lot of English, we still want them to have access to Gen AI, and it's important that we're considering in our policies ways that they can access them as well. So we have a few more minutes before the last module. I'm going to skip this for a second, but it's on the slide so you can look. This is ways that we can consider addressing equity, actual strategies here. So like universal design language for accessibility, multiple means of expression. So how are there different ways that students can be completing the work, expressing how it's completed for them, different means of engagement? Are there differing strategies that we have for students to learn differently? And also different means of support. Students need different levels of support, and we need to be providing all of that. So we'll spend the last few minutes before the next module. So I'll do like 5 minutes. Just think about for a second what we talked about. You're not going to have the full time to do this. Think about maybe some of the policy challenges in the transform framework that you're having challenges with at your school. Maybe think about some of those equity challenges in particular, and just discuss with one another what's coming after this module here. What's one of the big things that you're going to go and think more about? So let's just spend a few minutes and then we'll go on to the next module. Everyone has their hand up and it's still loud. Okay. So thank you. I know we don't have a lot of time today, so we're trying to get through it. So now we're going into module 10, and I now can walk around because look at me. Woo. So, okay, so module 10, future of engineering education with Gen AI. So now this is a little fun for me. I get to talk a little about some of my research. So let's get into it. Learning objectives. So for this module, we're going to aim to analyze some future impacts potentially. Of course, the future is the hardest thing to predict. But we're going to evaluate some emerging trends and maybe think about some institutional or policy developments. And then we're going to talk more about addressing equity concerns and some strategies to navigate uncertainty. So, quick question, just read a few of these. How realistic do they seem to you? So, in 2029, an engineering graduate student who learned thermodynamics primarily through Gen AI-assisted problem solving. Sound realistic? Some head nods, maybe? Engineering firms requiring an AI interpreter because they all use human AI collaboration tools. Does that sound maybe? Maybe, no. Cybersecurity in 2030, who can't detect vulnerabilities without using AI. They're completely dependent on it. Or how about instructors being able to get real-time feedback, right? These models are big right now, but can they be sped up? Like, what if you're teaching and you have students completing stuff and it's telling you in real time what they're actually writing? So these are some different scenarios that are actually happening as we speak, right? There are developments across higher education, and we'll see what happens, really. So this is to scare all of you. And this is just a hypothetical, okay? Obviously, I can't predict the future, but this is just to illustrate at least a way of thinking. And a big assumption here is that students' Gen AI use continues to grow. And that as institutions, we don't adapt quickly enough. So what might happen? What's a worst case scenario, okay? So let's start at the low level, okay? At the low level, we have students using ChatGPT or other AI for their homework, but instructors can still assess understanding, right? We adjust and we figure out some new strategies. So at a low level of impact, we have traditional knowledge systems, knowledge representations that are challenged. And it's hard for us, but the system weathers the blow, right? We handle it and we keep moving and things don't really change all that much. This would be a resounding success, right? Because largely the work that we're doing could continue largely unchanged. And we figure out how to keep measuring student competency, student learning, and that continues. And AI is just another tool that students can use, like they can use simulation tools. But now, what about at a medium level of impact? So I mentioned in the first module about the game of Go, which I actually learned was invented in Japan, not China, so excuse me. Oh, there, medium level of impact. So when AlphaGo, the Google AI system, was introduced to Go, there's a great research paper from Key 2024 that analyzed what happened to Go expertise. So all these grandmasters, all these people who had spent thousands of hours playing Go from the time they were children, what happened to all of them? Well, there was a complete transformation, and still today, a complete transformation in the roles of experts and in the roles of learners in the learning process, the relationships that they have to one another, the roles that these technologies play, because all of a sudden you now had an AI that showed humans actually don't know as much as they thought they knew about AI. There are strategies, there are techniques that humans never considered before. And now now in the Go community, experts often translate AI outputs because they make a move. Novices don't understand how to evaluate that move, so they have to rely on an expert who understands what's happening. And experts now have to translate what's happening from these models. In addition, and I'm sure many of you have seen this, novices are using AI to critique the experts and say, hey, you weren't good enough, right? You could have made a better move. So in this medium level of impact, there's a professional identity crisis because the new tasks, the new challenges that emerge require a renegotiation for the role of teachers, for the role of experts, for how we engage with one another and these tools. That's a medium level. At a high level of impact, our traditional ways of measuring competency, of measuring success, are completely undermined. We have no way of truly evaluating whether or not someone has learned. We have no way of evaluating what they actually know. And this creates a type of dependency where human AI knowledge become almost like hybridized. And we now know and do through AI. As much as we think for ourselves, we're actually thinking with AI for all these parts of not only the learning process, but also in engineering work. These things just become how we do engineering. So that's a high level of impact because that would be a complete change in not only the education system, but also globally professional work, expert work, our trust in experts, our trust in these systems. And that leads us to the civilizational level impact. These tools, we all talk about, they're opaque, they're black box, right? We can't know why they're making decisions. We don't understand the patterns that they are finding. And there's work being done to make them somewhat explainable, but even so, it's a different way of pattern recognition. It's a different way of communicating information than we've seen before. So I'm asking you, what happens if we reach that high level of impact and everyone needs an AI to know, to do, to learn, to literally exist, but those technologies are by their definition unknowable? What happens then as a civilization if the only way that we can do anything is through a technology that we fundamentally cannot understand? I'm thinking about security systems, right? I'm thinking about energy infrastructure. I'm thinking about like war and weaponry, defense mechanisms. If humans rely on AI for everything, for all of their knowledge, for everything that they need to do to be a professional, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our futures? And are we then relying on these companies to essentially mediate our whole world? So I call that a civilizational level impact because engineering expertise and other types of expertise that rely on trust, fundamentally rely on trust, becomes undermined. Because I trust you as much as I trust a model, and I trust the model as much as I trust a company, and we have to depend on all of it, and we don't have an option. So I hope you're scared. These are just a few, it's just one scenario. Obviously, there could be other scenarios. But the point here is to illustrate that if we're not careful and if we don't act toward these things, we can be creating conditions that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we learn, oh, we really messed up. We didn't act enough. And this is a lot of the stuff that motivates at least my work, is thinking about how we can avoid scenarios like this. So I want to do a small group activity. We're going to shorten it a little bit. But just real quick in your groups, just quick discussion. Think about one thing in your discipline, one aspect of your teaching, and think about at these different levels, how bad could it get? Let's just do like 5 minutes. All right, I'm assuming everyone's raising their hand because they thought of an impact that scares them, yeah? Yeah? The point with that is not so much to freak everyone out, as I said, but just to be real about what happens, right? Or what could happen. Obviously, different scenarios are possible as well, and scenarios I'm not considering, definitely. But it's important for us to be thinking about those and also maybe be talking with students about what could happen too, so that they recognize their role in this process. So let's talk a little bit more about actual developments that are happening right now and maybe where they'll lead. So I wanted to put up this timeline again to just remind us about the previous history of AI, right? Where we saw a rise in symbolic AI with those rule systems. We then saw the first AI winter, then the growth of expert systems, then the second AI winter, and then big data, and now new architectures, and what's going to happen now, right? So we have a lot of investment in AI. And you have people talking quite a lot about this thing called an AI bubble. That we're investing all this money into AI and it might be for nothing. That the returns on AI are not as significant as we think they're going to be. So you have, here's just a few, right? So the Atlantic, how bad would an AI bubble be, right? There's an AI bubble. There are 3 AI bubbles, right? Jerome Powell from the United States Fed chair, signs of an AI bubble, unusually large amounts of economic activity. Sam Altman, Mark Zuckerberg talking about a collapse in this bubble. So whether or not the bubble is a thing, who knows? But right now there's a lot of investment in AI, and it's to be determined whether or not that investment is going to pan out. So why don't we look at actually some developments right now that are proving successful in higher education. Now, if you recall from the timeline, hold on. In the timeline here, one of the key things to take away from this is that what has made AI successful in the past has been taking these technologies and putting them into specific applications. And it's in those specific applications, whether that's manufacturing or whether that's like supply chains, right? It's those specific applications for specific industries that create value. So if we look at higher education, what are some specific applications right now? So obviously a big one here is going to be using Gen AI with students to help them learn more, right? So here is a LLM empowered learning agent. So a student can talk with the model and it gets structured feedback based on not just the slides that an instructor is presenting, but then also it pretends to be different roles. It pretends to be a teacher, it pretends to be a peer, right? And it helps the student learn for themselves in a personalized way. We also see this too in from a programming standpoint, right? Because these tools are being used a lot by programmers. They're also great at generating code. So there are now custom tools, custom developing environments for students and for actual practitioners to work with large language models for their code and to have a programming assistant that when you ask a question, it gives someone questions in response versus just giving them the answer. We also have, again, AI tutors, but this type of AI tutor is for a class. So maybe what you do is you're able to give all these different resources for your class, like all the different lecture notes, the different assignments, textbook information. You can give it to a model, and then when a student asks a question, it pulls the relevant information to help answer that question. So there's a lot of work right now in trying to create these types of systems that instead of just telling you what seems most likely, it actually gives you citations, appropriate information, and information about your class or information from a textbook to back up its claims. This is also, this is for automating feedback. So something I've talked with many of you about so far is thinking about how to use models to provide feedback for your students. So an example might be feedback on an essay, right? Feedback on a test where you give it the grade, you give it the test, and then it helps you with some like template, create a feedback report that you then give to your student and helps them have some more personalized learning. Alternative strategies are ones that maybe you take feedback from students' peers, and you use that to create feedback reports for students. So a big area right now in development is using large language models to create this type of customized feedback for students. And that's something we're working on a lot too. And actually the citation up here on the top right, these are some of our colleagues at Virginia Tech who are interested in this as well. This is actually some diagrams from our research. And this is using large language models to do qualitative data analysis. So using them to analyze large segments of text, or maybe like student evaluations of teaching, where they write a little bit about what they thought about your teaching, and then we can create a report for an instructor that says, hey, look, these are the themes in your class that people are talking about. And these diagrams show from like a programming standpoint how we do that. But the broader point is these models are great at synthesizing information, and we can leverage that ability to analyze text that otherwise would be very hard for us to do and take a long time to do. So those are some applications. What's also happening in terms of institutional approaches to generative AI? What are schools doing right now? I put up two examples here. So the first is from University of Michigan. They created their own customized GPT. Duke University also did their own. Other schools are coming out with some. Virginia Tech has some options like this as well. Usually it's the larger schools, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But these tools are hosted by institutions. They are customized by institutions and available for students, for teachers, for administrators, so that they can work with AI in a more controlled environment, in a private, secure environment. And also, these types of systems give feedback to instructors, give feedback to administrators about use. So instead of it just going to OpenAI or going to Google, it goes back to your institution. So you can say, hey, students are most often using AI to just copy and paste problems, and we now need to address it. So having a model like this hosted by your institution, having something like this has a tremendous benefit in terms of accessibility, in terms of transparency when it comes to your use, but again, requires quite a lot of implementation details. So these different implementation levels, I guess you could say, are kind of generic, but it just goes to show that there are many different ways that an institution can approach leveraging AI. So at a basic level, right, there are these services with OpenAI, with Anthropic, that are education platforms, right? Like ChatGPT for education, Claude for education. And the idea is to help provide some usage tracking, but that requires a license. It requires paying these companies, and also being critical about some of their privacy policies and looking into them. But that's the simplest level of implementation, that basic level. Tier 2 is what I just showed you, basically. Some self-hosted models, also using commercial available services. You might also have some domain-specific applications. So it's like, hey, we have a model, right? And let's make a model specific for our mechanical engineering department that does X, Y, and Z, right? They also require authentication to access. So LMS integration, single sign-on. So you have to be associated with the university in order to access these tools. So there's an element here of security. And as I mentioned, this is being done by larger schools. Of course, all these levels here require many different stakeholders to be involved. But as we get more complex, the number of stakeholders goes up, and it also costs a lot more money. At the last tier, tier 3 would be not only having your own models hosted and commercially available ones, but also doing model creation, like training models, maybe using some student information, training models on specific applications for your university, and deploying them for people at your university to access. It also means using Gen AI to accelerate or help enhance your teaching and your research. These are tools that are now part of the broader ecosystem at your school. It includes advanced security. Rather than just requiring a single sign-on, This actually has student data handling protections. People might be able to use the data for research purposes, and there's consideration for how the data gets transferred. And also from a compute standpoint, these models take a lot of heavy hardware to be able to run, and schools would be investing in the type of compute systems needed to run these different tools. So if we look at that last one, the full integration, what would that look like? And this is kind of taking a systems level view of different things that would need to be addressed. So like at a user interface level, custom chatbots that are maybe integrated with Canvas, Blackboard, I'm not sure if you have something like that. But that would offer students course-specific help, right? And that's for students. You also might have tools for researchers, and there's a research portal. You might have student services, right? All the time, our advisors are overwhelmed by the number of students who are asking very simple questions about what courses they should take, if they're on track for their degree. These are opportunities maybe to leverage models to help provide students with information that is well known and easily accessible. Administrative tools, understanding use, understanding grading schemes, scheduling. There are ways that we can be integrating models so that it's not just helpful for students, teachers, researchers, but also the administrators who are overseeing the tools. At a model layer, so what types of models would it take to do something like this? Obviously, you'd have some specialized models, you'd have some foundational models, whether those are commercial ones, but then also openly accessible ones, Llama, Mistral, hosted on university servers. You would have maybe specialized models tuned for different disciplines, tuned for different domains, multimodal, so it could handle images, audio, not just text, right? Because people are going to be interfacing with these tools differently, and we want to be handling that. And vector databases, so an idea would be that you have a store of university knowledge, not university information, that then these different tools can access. And at an infrastructure layer, what would that require? I mentioned the clusters for training and inference that you would need, the type of technology, data governance. What are we doing with student data? How are we handling it for research? Network, where is Gen AI use taking place? How are we controlling it? How are we making sure that that students' data is not being shared more widely? And then also audit trails. If something goes wrong, making sure that we know where to track it. And then storage systems. All of this stuff takes a lot of space to run. And if you were taking all of your institutional data and putting it into a database, you need some pretty intense storage as well to handle all this stuff. So quick one here. Write down, this is a think, pair, share. So just think for a minute and then partner with someone at your table and focus on what's one tool that you wish existed for teaching, for assessment, or for research, and then share with a neighbor. So it should be quiet for 1 minute. Ah, don't look, don't look. Okay, anyone want to quickly share? What's something they thought of? Anything? I'll call on someone. Yeah, correcting tests maybe? Yeah, that'd be cool.
You think that it would could be useful for the feedback process, because it's a really important part of the learning is the feedback. So if we could enhance our feedbacks, I think we think it could be really useful.
Yeah.
So just very quickly, so we were discussing here, and Fenda said something very important. So she said, blew out her mind that we need something that we can trust. That where is it going? So we need transparency. So the GI we wanted is a transparent one.
Might be hard. Yeah, wanting a transparent AI. I want that too. Yeah. Anyone else want to share?
For those where the AI, we need to take it from the big companies. I don't think we can. handle it. Yeah.
Anyone want stuff for research? Anything like that? Grading? Yeah. How about for your teaching? Anything come up for as a instructor? Would you want any type of thing?
If you use for analyzing what you did, comparing, okay, is this enough, or did I forget, or any trend or anything else? So I think that AI should help us not do our work, even for the students. They have to have, we say that they have to have competences. So it is knowledge plus attitude plus skills. They are only having attitude. They are not doing anything. They're just pressing the play. Okay, but you need to think to write a good prompt. Yes, but it's very easy to write, no, not that very easy, but it's easier to write a prompt than to calculate or to draw or to think or decision making. And we were talking about, it's very easy to see people that shows things on internet, and it's very easy, I will do on me, or not. Never happens the way that people does, because you don't have the ability, you don't have the skills, and you need to practice. But if you only press the button,
so maybe having tools that help students understand their dependency would be interesting. Having your first point about having tools for instructors to listen to get feedback on their own teaching. The reason I wanted to do this activity was to help you think about maybe a way that you could take a model and tailor it for an application you care about. Just because it doesn't exist today does not mean it can't exist. And you, as someone now who has learned a lot about AI, can try some of these different strategies, try some of these applications that you're thinking about, and see what they do. See if you gave it your lecture notes, right? What would it tell you to improve on or emphasize differently? If you gave it your examples in class, would it tell you some other examples that you could introduce? If you uploaded your audio of an entire presentation and asked it to give you feedback on your speaking, on your presentation styles, these are things that the models can do, but I'd encourage you, think about what is the need? What do I want? And try it out, right? Because as you try out these different models, you try out these different systems, you're going to learn more, and you'll be able to talk about what you've learned with your students and with other faculty members. So just because an application doesn't exist does not mean that you or someone else can't make it or that it won't exist. So again, we've talked about this quite extensively, about the resource divide. So what things might we be able to do at an institutional level? What are some current trends that are happening? So at a student level, we know that paid tools are creating advantages. And this is going to continue to be exacerbated with prompt libraries or organization or new educational apps that also require subscriptions. And that's stuff that we as instructors might be able to provide for our students. Like if you had for your class a list of prompts for getting code or for checking your work, writing a test, you're helping students understand how to interface with these tools. Similarly, at an institutional level, right, we're seeing some elite universities have access to Gen AI versus under-resourced ones or ones that are maybe still trying to get it developed. So thinking about faculty development resources, thinking about obviously the research computing access and ways that people can address the very different policy use is an active area of research and development right now that, again, requires all of our participation. And then at a global level too, as I mentioned, the digital divides in access, the distribution of labor for what's going into these different tools. So there's work being done to address language barriers in models, also work about regulatory restrictions, if standardization for different use cases, and then also model alignment, thinking about how they're aligned primarily with Western values and assumptions, and seeing ways to both show those types of biases and maybe also change them. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about bias in these models and the ways that people are researching bias and what we're learning more. And to do it, I'm actually going to use an example that isn't generative AI, but that illustrates the point very well. So this paper from 2021 looked at a variety of different X-ray detection systems. And these were top-tier ones used at many different health institutions across the globe. And they analyzed the rate of detection for different demographic groups, different backgrounds, and found overwhelmingly that these top-tier X-ray systems underdiagnosed women, it underdiagnosed Latino populations, it underdiagnosed Black populations, it undiagnosed people with certain insurances. And that had nothing to do with their condition. So what these models are learning is often hidden to us. And well, it is hidden to us. And almost every day you could find a new paper about a type of bias that's being embedded in these models. Because they're trained on historically biased data. What is that historically biased data? Biased humans. And it's learning from us. It's learning from both our good and our bad tendencies. And it has the potential to amplify educational disparities. And this is, again, going back to Module 9, something that we want to be talking about with our students actively are these types of biases. And here's a variety of papers that you can read, I would recommend checking out, that talk about specific instances of model bias, specific instances where models don't behave the way that we want them to behave, and ways that impacts our education, our educational use of these tools. So I was talking with people at lunch the other day. I read a paper, actually while we were in Brazil, that looked at the type of feedback that a model gave male and female students. And for male students, the feedback by default emphasized technical skills. It said, focus on developing your knowledge of computation, develop operational skills, and used very strong type of technical language. For female students, and this was unprompted, for female students, it talked about emphasizing their social awareness, their social teamwork skills, their ability to talk with one another and manage a team. And now these models were given identical input data and yielded quite different responses simply because of the information about the student. So when we're talking about model bias, it's extremely important to consider that we might not be able to figure out what that bias is until we compare it right up against another model output. And even if we do compare it with another model output, sometimes still the bias can be very hard for us to detect. For example, what if you were summarizing some feedback from a meeting and certain perspectives were minimized? Some points were not talked about in the meeting notes because historically some people have been ignored more than other people. So sometimes it's difficult for us to even understand the ways that these models are making decisions for us. And as the tools continue to make more decisions and be trained to do more for us with less input, these biases can become more challenging to figure out. Uh-oh. Maybe. So future policy directions. So as we've mentioned in Module 9, inconsistent institutional policies across universities, a one-size-fits-all approach isn't really working for anyone. There's faculty confusion around appropriate boundaries and student guidelines, and that vulnerability creates opportunities for students to exploit the gaps that we create. So what are some possible policy directions? Well, the first is a standardized path where there's just standard ideas for how everyone should behave. Probably unlikely, right? Because every institution is different, every class is different. So if we try aiming for this standardized path, it's important for us to consider what types of things we're trying to standardize and if those things are meaningful and actually can be implemented. The second one is a differentiation paths. So this one is where we have policies at different levels, and each level is tailored for a specific context. It creates variability. It creates a need for communication between different stakeholders, but allows us to be more tailored in the types of policy approaches that we have. And the third, which might take even longer to do, is a regulatory path where we rely on government to tell us how to manage these tools. So between the three, I don't know about you, but I think the differentiation path is probably the most likely and maybe also the most viable one for all of our different institutions and situations. And in the third, Andrew talked about yesterday, Gen AI resistant assessment. So we're thinking too about Gen AI resistant evaluation methods. So how are we evaluating collaborative frameworks, real-time competency verification? So things that we've talked about before. I'm not going to belabor the point. So now we're going to do, for the rest of the time, we got like 15-ish minutes. We're going to just do some future gazing. So I envisioned us moving around, but let's not do that. Instead, there are 3 different stations, and I want you in your groups to just start with the first and just go down. So the first one is a 5-year horizon. So what, for your department, what's engineering education going to look like in the next 5 years? Think about assessment, think about classroom dynamics, think about competencies, right, that we want developed. Now, and then in the next station, how will expertise be defined? How now will these 5-year trends play out in 15 years? So we're thinking about identity, we're thinking about collaboration norms, industry. And then in the last one, that's just for you to have fun. Think about what might happen 2035 from now. Think about radical transformations, maybe breakthroughs or equity concerns. So start again at station 1 and just keep going down and talk with one another, and then we'll come back and close out. All right, so so closing out module 10. Good discussions here and fun listening to people. So what do we do navigating all this uncertainty? I'm sure many of you talked about this. A key point here, experimental disposition. We don't need an approach that works perfectly, right? We're engineer. Well, I'm an engineer. A lot of us come from STEM backgrounds. Perfect is sometimes the enemy of good. And if we embrace instead iterative adaptation over perfect planning, that helps us get toward a more perfect solution. The second, epistemic humility, epistemic knowledge, knowing related. So acknowledge the limits of your current understanding, of other people's current understanding, and rather than be antagonistic or critical of that lack of understanding, let's be open to everyone being on a different learning process, a different learning trajectory. The third, student-centered focus. So this goes without saying, I think we all agree on this. We want to prioritize authentic learning, and we want to be addressing disparities as they continue to pop up. The fourth, equity vigilance. Again, continuously assess and addressing potential vulnerabilities in our policy when it comes to students with differing backgrounds and different access to these tools. And the last, build cross-institutional and even within your institutional support mechanisms. Because what's worse, the worst thing that you can do when things are uncertain is to just try to navigate it yourself. Find other people, listen to different perspectives, and we'll get through it. We'll figure out strategies that work for all of us. So the takeaway for module 10, because the future is uncertain, as is the nature of the future. Yeah, there's a funny joke that's like the hardest thing to predict is prediction is hard, especially when it's about the future. So what is one thing that I can do differently in my teaching, in my research, in my personal life, when it comes to these different points of uncertainty, these different futures that might happen? Think about these things, right? It's not just about our use today, but our use tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and years from now. All these different time scales we should be considering, and try to think about one key thing that you would take away from today's discussion about what's possible in your field, at your institution, and those things are important. And that's it for module 10. So thank you, and we'll get on with the last one. Oh, hey, you told me to be done at 10. Look at that.